2 or 3 minutes at a time. I'm not a fan of binge watching. I find it too concentrating. I find it too much. So I'll only watch about 40 minutes or 1 hour max
Really?
of a program. And then I'll save it because I want something to go to tomorrow and then the day after and the day after that. I'm old school like that. What about you?
Well, no, I'm more. I'm a classic from Meredith Petty's sample there of people because every 20 minutes or half an hour or so, I have to get up and the thing keeps rolling down on television, Netflix or whatever, and I'll run to the fridge and get what I need, or run to the pantry and get what I need, or there's always something going on. There's a frantic 3-minute burst of some form of exercise, mainly due to me, involving me eating or drinking something, but I don't know if that's going to help my binge body, but...
Yeah. I was going to say, I also, if I'm drinking while binge watching, I will absolutely get up every half an hour to go to the toilet. So I feel like they should factor that in as well, level of drunkenness while binge watching.
Nice one. Good on you. Okay, now, correction here, Philippa says, Jennifer Ward-Leland has been fully employed in Auckland Theatre Company's production of The Seagull during the lockdown. So just thought I'd read that out.
Sorry, that newspaper article was completely wrong there.
Oh. The final act is broadcast tomorrow night at 7 p.m. on ATC's YouTube channel. So that sounds very interesting. Now, to the beacon, the emergency beacons, I thought I might read this out because there's going to be quite a response. Emergency beacons are light and cost a few $100s. You basically push a button and it communicates via satellite to give an alert and GPS location to emergency services, who can then provide assistance without having to undertake the huge amount of work associated with a search for someone in an unknown location. It's easy to mistakenly think that the other person can go for help and therefore not to take a beacon, but often that person would have to leave the injured person, which may not be safe for either of them, and the other person is also lost. Okay, so that's well worth pointing out. I was in a situation only 2 hours walk away where I didn't have a beacon and nearly had to make that difficult choice. Fortunately, the patient was just able to stumble out with my assistance in time to get to hospital. Since then, I always take a beacon, even on short trips. I had to activate it once halfway through a 7-day trip with an immobilizing injury. I was reluctant to activate, but knew this was the responsible thing to do, compared with the huge resource and worry involved with a search and rescue operation based on something being overdue. Interesting bill, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think if you are going into the New Zealand bush, you should have one with you. If you're going on a long, difficult tramp, do it.
Have you ever been on a tramp, Bill Ralston?
Yeah, no, as I mentioned before, I've been up the Greenstone Valley and over the, yes, I have, basically, yeah. But that was a long while ago, and I'm too ancient and decrepit now.
Verity, any tramps coming up on the horizon for you?
Can't you tell? Do I not strike you as like a natural tramper? I'm lacing up my boots right now.
With the rhinestone?
No, God, no.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, indeed.
Sparkly like this.
Well, good on you. Thank you very much for being with me today, Verity Johnson and Bill Ralston, and have a wonderful evening, won't you?
Cheers.
I'm Wallace Chapman, Checkpoint next with you tomorrow. And we talk about 60 years of television tomorrow. And what TV show do you love the most out of all of them?
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei, a New Zealand website's pushing a bleach concoction as a COVID-19 cure. To be absolutely clear, medical authorities say it is definitely not. How much unrefunded customer cash is Air New Zealand hanging on to? I've been looking for you. A rescuer's first words to trampers who went missing in Kahurangi National Park during the Level 3 lockdown. Protesters clash with police following the death of African-American man George Floyd, who was pinned by his neck by a white officer. National's new leader, Todd Muller, is back in the BOP for his first public walkabout. Who did he call on for a cuppa? And the engineers who travelled halfway around the world in a pandemic to help fix Wellington's sewer system.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leata with tēnei. A New Zealand website is instructing people with symptoms of COVID-19 to drink bleach sold by a Hauraki Plains businessman. But experts say consuming bleach is dangerous and there's no scientific evidence it will help cure anything. Susan Strongman reports.
miraclemineral.co.nz provides instructions on how to prepare and drink bleach for adults, children and babies. The website claims the bleach, chlorine dioxide, cures 95% of diseases. The website links users to a Ngatia Man's online store. But medical researcher Dr. Sean Holt warns anyone who drinks it should seek medical help. The products with names like Miracle Mineral Solution are promoted by an American organisation called the Genesis 2 Church of Health and Healing. MedSafe warns that drinking bleach is potentially life-threatening.
Sarah Strongman reporting. The Prime Minister is defending the time frame for moving to Alert Level 1 as the country marks another day of no new cases. There are now only 8 COVID-19 cases considered to be active in the country. Cabinet will review the settings for Alert Level 2 on June the 8th and will look to move to Level 1 no later than June 22nd if cases remain low. However, coalition partner New Zealand First is pushing to move down alert levels sooner. Jacinda Ardern says the Cabinet is acting on the Director General of Health's advice.
We have moved and are opening up much more rapidly than many other countries, but we don't want to jeopardise the very privileged position New Zealanders have earned. And they worked hard to get us here, and I don't want them to lose that.
Jacinda Ardern. The Air Force medic who was first to reach 2 trampers missing in the Kahurangi National Park says his first words were, "I've been looking for you." Dion Reynolds and Jessica O'Connor were rescued yesterday amid emotional scenes from dense bush and difficult terrain in the remote Kahurangi National Park. They were reported missing after failing to return from a tramp they began from Anatori on May the 8th. Jace Denharder has told Checkpoint he was winched down to the pier after smoke from their fire was spotted yesterday.
I got down to the ground and once the helicopter moved away, I said, "I've been looking for you guys." And they were quite overjoyed. Yeah, that's when they came in and gave me a cuddle, I guess. Then after a while, they realised the gravity of the situation, and that's when the emotions started coming out.
Jace Denharder says their first words were how glad they were to see him. A senior bank economist says the wage subsidy has undoubtedly saved many jobs, but he expects worse to come. 37,500 people became unemployed in April, a monthly record. Stats NZ also recorded a rise of more than 30,000, claiming the job seeker support benefit. Westpac's Michael Gordon says the full impact of COVID-19 on jobs is likely to take several months to emerge. Economists at banks, Treasury and the Reserve Bank are forecasting unemployment to hit as high as 10% by the end of the year. Fish and Game says new freshwater reforms are a significant step to reducing pollution, but there is still work to do. The government is pushing ahead with tough new rules to improve both rural and urban fresh waterways. CEO Martin Taylor says there will be more work to do to protect waterways in the coming years.
We need to ensure the enforcement mechanisms are actually robust and that councils will do the job that they need to do. And the reality is many of them will need to be forced into a position of carrying out the government's agenda. And that's why we think a freshwater commission is probably the right way to go.
Martin Taylor says it's also concerning that a national bottom line for dissolved inorganic nitrogen, otherwise known as DIN, has been postponed for at least another 12 months. The Prime Minister says today's funding boost will help the arts sector save jobs and innovate in the face of the global pandemic. The funding includes an extra $25 million for Creative New Zealand, $18 million for Te Papa and nearly $32 million for Ngā Taonga Sound and Vision. Jacinda Ardern says it will help them to maintain core operations, safeguard jobs and also create new ones. A teenager has been rescued after attempting to cross the Cook Strait in a dinghy. The 18-year-old called the harbour master at 9 this morning and told them his motorised dinghy had broken down off the Mana coast near Wellington. He started out last night from Kinepuru Sound. The police found him using his cell phone signal about 12 kilometres west of Mana Island. It's coming up to 5 minutes past 5. World Rugby has poured cold water on the idea of an unofficial World Cup next year. Former England rugby boss Francis Barron put forward a plan for a 16-team tournament in the UK and Ireland to boost the game's finances after the coronavirus stoppage. But World Rugby says it won't be pursuing the proposal. The All Blacks were due to host Wales and Scotland in July, but are now looking at more games against Australia later in the year. The Warriors forward stocks have been bolstered by the month-long loan of Poasa Fa'amausili from the Roosters. The Auckland-born prop won't play the side's opening game against the Dragons on Saturday, linking up with the Warriors on Monday instead. The NRL resumes tonight with Brisbane playing Parramatta. Eels coach Brad Arthur says their 58-0 thumping of the Broncos in last year's playoffs doesn't give them an edge or any edge for the match.
Last year. Sometimes you have those games both against you and for you. You know, everything worked for us, nothing worked for them. So there's no edge at all. If anything, you know, the last game that they might be remembering is the last time we played them at Suncorp and it went down to a golden point thriller. So it's going to be a different game altogether.
Brad Arthur. That's the news.
A tramper tells us how he survived weeks without food.
13 days of no food. But our saving grace was the fact that a 2-minute walk across the gully was a fresh, mossy stream that was nice and clean for us to drink, and that's what kept us alive.
And about the little things that matter.
Out of nowhere, about 10 minutes into the ride, gave us a couple of chocolate bars. The best chocolate bar I've ever had in my life.
Morning Report, weekdays from 6, on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waitomo, including Coromandel. Mostly fine. Isolated showers about eastern Northland, Auckland and Coromandel today. Rain in Northland tomorrow morning, spreading elsewhere in the evening. Taranaki to Wellington, including Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Mainly fine today, cloud increasing tomorrow. A few showers developing in Bay of Plenty. Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast and Wellington tomorrow. Gisborne to Wairarapa, cloudy with isolated light showers about the coast. Clearing this afternoon with fine spells increasing. The odd shower in Wairarapa tomorrow. Bulla, Nelson and Marlborough fine today. Scattered rain spreading from the west tomorrow. Fiordland and Southland cloud with drizzle about Fiordland and Stewart Island. Spreading to coastal Southland tomorrow. Remainder of the South Island mostly fine with morning frosts or fog. Persisting in some inland valleys. Low cloud and patchy drizzle in Canterbury tomorrow. Chatham Islands cloudy with drizzle at times. RNZ National, coming up to 8 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna, and welcome to Checkpoint. A New Zealand website is claiming that COVID-19 can be cured by drinking bleach. The site claims that chlorine dioxide has been tested effective against coronavirus and recommends that people with symptoms of the virus, including babies, drink or inhale it. The site links users to a Hauraki Plains business to buy the chemicals. In-depth reporter Susan Strongman has more.
Well, it's time, 9 o'clock, time for I pour in a lime. And there's a little more taste to it. I personally drink it out of the bottle. I'm used to the taste.
That's South America-based Genesis 2 church leader Mark Grennan showing his followers how to drink bleach.
And drink it every hour.
The church encourages people to drink diluted chlorine dioxide, a bleach, claiming it cures 95% of the world's diseases. Its followers include Ngatia man Roger Blake, who sells the chemicals here in New Zealand through his online water purification business. A website, Miracle Mineral, which is linked to a Ngatia address, provides instructions on how to consume the bleach for adults, children and babies. The site encourages people with COVID-19 symptoms to drink bleach. It provides detailed instructions on how to buy the chemicals from Mr. Blake's business and links users to his online store. Medical researcher Dr. Sean Holt warns that no one should ever drink chlorine dioxide.
It goes without saying it's extremely dangerous. No one should consume it. It's industrial strength bleach. There's not a jot of scientific evidence that it can help anything.
Dr. Holt says consuming it can cause nausea, vomiting, diarrhea and dehydration, which in severe cases can lead to death. He says he's been warning people not to drink bleach for at least 10 years.
This has been around for a long time now under the name of Miracle Mineral Solution or various other names, which is basically a concentrated bleach solution with claims made that it can cure pretty much everything from HIV to cancer to now to COVID-19.
The Genesis 2 Church was founded in the US to promote drinking chlorine dioxide. Members can become bishops by doing a $320 online course and providing Genesis 2 with 2 video testimonials of people who have been treated with the bleach. The Ngatia man, Roger Blake, who sells chlorine dioxide, is one such bishop. Mr. Blake says there's been an increase in orders since the COVID-19 pandemic began, and he insists that chlorine dioxide is safe to drink.
If something harms you, it's not going to be spreading the way it's spreading, and this is spreading like wildfire. There's now millions of people around the world that have overcome everything from cancer to HIV to even autism. It's reversing.
Waikato University biologist and science educator Dr. Alison Campbell says when people are scared or desperate, they become vulnerable to misinformation. She says people selling products like chlorine dioxide take advantage of this fear.
I think it's unethical to be promoting it. I think it's amoral to be claiming that it cures something like COVID.
Dr. Campbell says it's often disenfranchised people who are attracted to things like so-called miracle mineral supplements.
If you're a person who's disenfranchised and you think that the man's going to get you, then there's something probably quite attractive in an alternative narrative that allows you to have the perception that you're actually taking control, that you're not actually being buffeted around by random acts of nature, which is what COVID is, and you're not being dictated to by the man.
Authorities in the US and Australia have taken action over the sale of chlorine dioxide as a medicine. In response to queries from RNZ, MedSafe has put out an alert warning consumers of the potentially life-threatening side effects caused by drinking bleach. For Checkpoint, call Susan Strongman aho.
I've been looking for you. Those were the first words of New Zealand Defence Force medic Jace Denharder as he reached trampers Dion Reynolds and Jessica O'Connor. Amid emotional scenes, the pair was rescued yesterday from dense bush in difficult terrain in the remote Kahurangi National Park. Air Force personnel involved in today's retrieval of rescue crew, who remained overnight, were on their way back to Ohakia this afternoon when they diverted to Nelson to talk to media. Here's our Nelson reporter Tracy Neal and videographer Simon Rogers with the story.
Jace Denharder was the first person Dion Reynolds and Jessica O'Connor saw when he winched down from a large helicopter hovering not far above them.
I got down to the ground, and once the helicopter moved away, I said, "I've been looking for you guys." And they were quite overjoyed, and that's when they came in and gave me a cuddle, I guess. And then after a while, they realised the gravity of the situation, and that's when the emotions started coming out for Jessica. Yeah.
Dion and Jessica left on the 8th of May for a tramp into the challenging terrain from Anatori, a remote part of northwest Nelson above Karamea and below Cape Farewell. It was more than a week later that a friend reported them missing, and an extensive search began, first by land, and soon the heavy search artillery was called upon. The Air Force NH-90 is equipped with infrared heat-seeking equipment, but failed to locate them. And then, by a small miracle of sunlight angle, smoke from their fire was seen yesterday, says Flight Lieutenant Loic Frenchy Efra.
We went in this morning in similar light conditions before the sun was up, and just thought how lucky they were to have been in that position at that time of day when the sun was basically overhead. Because seeing into the holes in the trees when they're in cast and shadow is virtually impossible.
Jace Denharder says he was relieved to see they were uninjured.
Pretty much they got up and walked towards me, which is a great deal to see initially, because there's obviously no lower limb injuries and stuff. And their face of excitement when I got down through the canopy. Yeah, you're always hopeful. The family were hopeful, we were hopeful, so it was always good. They said they found fresh water, which pretty much saved them. So
He says the first words from the clearly exhausted pair were they were so glad to see him. Corporal Tom Hansen was the loadmaster and hoist operator who lifted the pair from the ground. He says it was fairly challenging.
Just due to the nature of the terrain and the location where they were. So we were sat in about 150-foot hover. So that's about 45 metres above the terrain. We had trees, thick canopy, and about a 3-metre clearing to extract them from. So a fairly small area. On the left-hand side of the aircraft, we had about 25 feet below the main rotor of the aircraft to the trees. And then on the right-hand side, as the train dipped away, we had probably about 50 feet.
Once on board en route to Nelson, the pair sat quietly in the chopper, eating a chocolate bar and grinning broadly. Jace says it's his 7th search and rescue and one of the best. The unflappable medic didn't even flinch when the airport bird gun started firing.
I guess that's probably the career pinnacle so far. I've been in the Air Force for 5 years, but I was 5 years Army before that.
So where have your other search and rescues been? Where else have you searched?
Quite a few in the Ruahinis and close to Ahaki and stuff, yeah. I guess the terrain's a bit more opened, yeah, because this was quite dense.
All said they were lucky to have such calm weather so near the typically wild winter storms in the area. In Nelson for Checkpoint, Tracy Neal.
And if you were listening to that piece on the radio, you can look back at Tracy and Simon's item online. We'll put it up on our Facebook page and our website. And there are some outstanding questions about why the pair went tramping during Level 3 lockdown and how the cost of their rescue will be covered. We've been unable to reach the police today for a response. Another death of an unarmed black man in police custody has sparked anger across the US. George Floyd begged for his life as a white officer pressed his knee against the African-American man's neck until he died. His killing has put racism once again back in the spotlight in an already fractious country. Our World Watch reporter Max Toll has more.
In Central Park, a white woman calls the police to accuse a black man who simply asked her to put her dog on a leash of threatening her life.
There is a man, African American, he has a bicycle helmet. He is recording me and threatening me and my dog. There is an African American man, I am in Central Park. He is recording me and threatening myself and my dog.
In a gym in Minneapolis, a white man threatens to call the police on a group of young black entrepreneurs.
I'm a tenant in the building. Are you?
We're all tenants in this building.
What office?
Don't worry about that. We don't have to say anything.
What office?
So we have an office here, and this guy came accusing us we can't be here.
What office are you in?
Don't worry about that. We don't have to tell you anything.
I'm calling 911 now.
Go ahead.
Everyday racism. But, again in Minneapolis, this now viral and shocking video of a black man dying in police custody is anything but everyday.
Man, I can't breathe my face. Just get up.
What do you want?
I can't breathe. Please, the knee in my neck. I can't breathe.
Bro, get up, get in the car, man.
I will.
Get up, get in the car.
I can't move.
The footage is clear. A police officer presses his knee against George Floyd's neck until he loses consciousness and dies. One witness, Donald Williams, says this happened for at least 8 to 10 minutes while the officer ignored Mr. Floyd begging for his life.
If you hear in the video, I actually asked him, I said, what's going on, officer? This is when I finally approached because the people said his blood coming out his nose. And I'm noticing it now at the point his eyes is turning a different color, and he's talking about his belly hurts, which is pretty much your last bowel movement in your life. Bro, they wanted to kill that man, bro. Like, I'm gonna be 100, bro. They didn't speak. They didn't say nothing. The views in his eyes, bro. The man that had his knee on his chest, bro. He knew what he was doing. His shimmies in my man's neck, bro. He knew what he was doing. It's just like having a jiu-jitsu choke.
A jiu-jitsu choke, that's how Donald Williams might describe it. But one thing is clear, the officer is not following procedure. He and 3 other officers involved in the incident have been fired, but for the mayor of Minneapolis, that's not enough.
Why is the man who killed George Floyd not in jail? If you had done it, or I had done it, we would be behind bars right now.
And it's not enough for Black Lives Matter protesters who have marched across the country today. In LA, they kicked and smashed the windows of a police car after another took off with a man still sitting on its hood. This was captured by local TV.
You see CHP officer trying to push his way through the traffic. Guy riding on the hood, guy on the windshield dove off. Here comes another unit around as we widen out here. You can see this one person here, that's the one that was on the windshield, came flying off as the officer drove away. And now, here we go. Here we're going to this is going to be a bad thing. Start kicking the car. That officer should just drive away. He needs to drive away.
There is real, palpable anger in the US right now. George Floyd isn't the first, and he won't be the last unarmed black man killed by police. For so many, George Floyd's final words, "I can't breathe," say it all. For Checkpoint, Max Toll.
A new survey has revealed Air New Zealand's coffers are cashed up with millions of dollars of customer money that it's not refunding, despite the flights never taking off. The survey by Consumer NZ found the 1,700 respondents had paid a total of $3.8 million for their flights. Now, with some customers out of a job, they want cash, not credits, to get by. Jordan Bond reports.
People surveyed by Consumer NZ paid an average of $2,200 each to Air New Zealand for flights that never happened. For most other purchases, it'd be an open and closed case, as Consumer NZ's Chief Executive John Duffy explains.
So if you bought a fridge and the supplier couldn't get you that fridge and cancelled the contract, the Consumer Guarantees Act provides you a right to a refund. Unfortunately, the Civil Aviation Act in New Zealand overrides other consumer protection legislation and lets carriers off the hook where the reason for the cancellation is beyond their control.
So Air New Zealand don't have to provide a refund. Consumers research found only 6% of those surveyed did actually receive one. Mr Duffy says the remaining 94% of people surveyed have either got airline credit for future use or are waiting to hear if the company will hold on to their money.
People are really disappointed in how Air New Zealand is acting here. They don't feel that their hard-earned money should be used to prop the company up.
Mr Duffy says they've heard from people now out of a job and with no income who really need that money to live. That money is essentially locked in with the airline and can only be spent with the company. Independent economist Benji Patterson says the amount of consumers' money the airline holds is not insignificant for a company already in financial trouble. He says its books late last year held about $1.4 billion of ticket revenue in advance and $1 billion in cash.
It has a large outstanding liability to customers. If they were to convert it into cash for customers, they would already be putting themselves in a position where they had to draw on the government's loan and they'd have to immediately begin paying relatively high rates of interest.
That's the $900 million loan the government's put forward for the airline if it needs it, which it has not dipped into yet. Mr Patterson says a lot of the money would be frequent flyers who probably aren't hard up for cash, but some would be less well off.
They're not someone that would travel very regularly at all, and it was a once-in-a-lifetime situation. So there is a case for an extenuating circumstances policy. It's just, I don't think it would be prudent to open up the floodgates to absolutely every customer.
Consumer NZ's letters to the Air New Zealand Chief Executive Greg Foran have gone unanswered. The watchdog's also written to Commerce and Consumer Affairs Minister Chris Farfoy and Finance Minister Grant Robertson, neither of which were available for comment this afternoon. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Jordan Bond, tēnei.
While our borders remain pretty much closed to everyone but New Zealand citizens and permanent residents to prevent COVID-19 cases being imported, hundreds of foreigners have actually been allowed into the country under special exemptions. More than 2,200 workers have been granted exemptions, some of them on economic grounds. So what's the criteria and what industries are deemed essential? Economic Development Minister Phil Twyford joins us now. Hi Minister, how many exemptions have you signed off on?
So I've signed off under what is actually a very narrow range of criteria for exemptions for what's called other essential workers. I've signed off 22 applications over the last month, and that's about 154 individuals.
So what are those other essential industries, and what do they need to prove to be allowed into the country?
So to give you some examples of the kinds of things that have been approved, for example, a technical specialist who installs chairlifts at a ski field, a specialist ultrasound technician for scanning ewes to determine pregnancy, someone supporting installing and commissioning wind turbine generators on a wind farm. So quite a diverse range. And as you say, there have been a number of people who've come in from film production industry.
How many from film production?
56.
56 of the 154, you were saying?
That's correct.
So like a third of them. And what evidence did they have to produce that their jobs were essential, or what benefit do they have to prove?
So there are three main principles that the officials apply when they assess these applications. The first is that the person seeking the exemption has to have some kind of specialist skill or talent that can't be filled from within New Zealand. There's an element of it being time critical. Why do you need it now? Why now and not in 6 months or 12 months? And the third thing is an assessment of the economic value of this person coming into the country at this point. And it has to be much more significant than just, it would be inconvenient for this particular firm. Generally, the officials look for evidence that it would have an impact on significant employment or supply chain, so it would affect a wider community or a wider industry.
So of the film industry applicants then, how much were they worth to us? What's the dollar figure of their economic value?
Oh, I don't have that in front of me, Lisa. I know it was significant. A lot of these productions, without certain cast and crew that could not be filled from within New Zealand, some of these productions are seeing hundreds of millions of dollars invested and sometimes hundreds of jobs.
I can understand why, if they had a specific person cast in a role, that might be the case. But surely there'd be New Zealanders here that could do every part of film production, wouldn't there?
So in some of these cases that we are talking specific cast members, and the applications that I signed off were for productions that were already underway and they were interrupted by the lockdown restrictions, and so they were wanting to come in and resume filming and production.
Who pays for their quarantine?
So under this narrow economic exemption, the firms who apply on behalf of those workers pay for the quarantine facilities. In general, the quarantine and supervised isolation arrangements that have been in place for all of the people coming in, New Zealanders and all of the other people coming in, like, on humanitarian reasons or essential health workers, family members of people with residence visas that got stranded overseas. All of those people coming in have been, the Crown has paid for their quarantine arrangements. But with this special economic exemption, the companies who are applying, they pay.
So do they go to the same managed facilities that everyone else is going to, or are they nominating where they are staying?
My understanding, Lisa, is that they've been going to the same facilities, but officials are exploring the possibility at the moment that, in the expectation that we're going to progressively free up these restrictions over time, we are exploring the idea of other ways and other facilities that could be, for example, a firm bringing in a number of workers could arrange those quarantine facilities, but they would have to be certified and signed off by the officials first.
How far down the track are you with that?
It's just exploratory at the moment, I think.
So how far
off? I should stress, Lisa, I would say we're a number of weeks. I should stress, Lisa, that this is an interim arrangement. Things have been changing so fast as the government's been responding to COVID-19. For the first, 6 weeks or so, public servants assessed these exemption applications and took them to the COVID Cabinet Committee. About a month ago, Cabinet tasked me with handling these exemptions. But while all this work's going on, actually there's a great deal of work underway to look at the wider settings for the border. There's a lot of talk about how we can build the world's smartest border. There's a lot of work underway around the Trans-Tasman bubble. This question about skilled workers that are needed for the economy, it's obviously a very different labour market now than it was pre-COVID. So taking all of those things into account, there's work underway that will end up in a cabinet paper looking at all of these policies. So the exemptions that I'm doing are just really an interim arrangement.
Okay, so any of those exemptions that you signed off, were any against the advice of officials?
No.
Okay, let's move on. Can you just chuck your Transport Minister hat on for a quick second? We've just done a story about Air New Zealand here. How comfortable are you with Air New Zealand holding on to millions of dollars of money that they're not refunding to Kiwis, many of whom want that money back because they're in a tight spot? How comfortable are you with that?
Yeah, so this is not something that I'm responsible for as Transport Minister, Lisa, but I will say that the government's not altogether happy with what's been going on in relation to this with Air New Zealand. My colleague Chris Farfoy, who's Minister of Consumer Affairs, he's, I think, been pretty critical publicly about this. He's got some work underway with officials.
Yeah, well, he's told us he's written...
to look at.
Yeah, he told us he spoke to you a couple of weeks ago and asked you about reviewing aviation laws around the refunds. So where are you at with that? What work are you doing?
Yeah, so I've got work underway with the Civil Aviation Bill, which is a major overhaul of our civil aviation legislation. It covers a wide range of different issues, and I've agreed that officials should look at this issue, reporting on the content of possible reforms to Minister Farfoy, and I'm very happy for it to be included in the overhaul.
So are you recommending that there be a change in the law that allows people to get refunds? Will that be the recommendation?
Well, I think that's the general thrust of what Minister Farfoy has asked for work to be done on, but I haven't seen any official advice on that yet, so I wouldn't like to comment.
So are you committed to doing this? Lots of Kiwis want to know about this. It's a lot of money.
I think on the face of it, you'd have to think that there's a case for looking at change, but it's not without its complexities, and the officials are doing some work. I haven't yet seen any advice on it, but it will be Minister Farfoy who leads on that.
Time frame for it?
I'm not. You'd have to ask Minister Farfoy that, sorry.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is Phil Twyford, who's the Economic Development Minister and Transport Minister. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, Todd Muller calls in for a cuppa at his former workplace on his first walkabout since being elected Nationals leader. Another person is added to the COVID-19 death toll. The arts industry gets a $100 million boost. And saving our waterways, the government pushes ahead with landmark freshwater reforms. We would love your feedback. Get in touch about anything you've heard on the program this evening. You text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's get to the headlines now.
Experts are warning people not to be taken in by a website touting a bleach product sold by a Hauraki Plains businessman as a cure for COVID-19. They say consuming chlorine dioxide is dangerous and there's no evidence it will help cure anything. The Prime Minister says Cabinet is being cautious about moving to Alert Level 1 on the advice of the Director-General of Health. There are no new coronavirus cases for a sixth day and only 8 active cases in the country, all in the Auckland region. Cabinet will review Alert Level 2 settings on June the 8th and move to Level 1 by June the 22nd if cases remain low. The paramedic who greeted 2 trampers missing in the Kahurangi National Park says his first words were, "I've been looking for you." Dion Reynolds and Jessica O'Connor were rescued from Dents Bush yesterday after failing to return from a tramp they began on May the 8th. Westpac bank economist Michael Gordon says the wage subsidy has saved many jobs, but the full impact of COVID-19 won't be known for several months. April has seen a record loss of 37,500 jobs, and Stats NZ says 30,000 people claimed the dole last month. Fish and Game says there is still work to do to improve the country's waterways, despite today's announcement of freshwater reforms. Spokesperson Martin Taylor says councils may need to be forced to help clean up waterways. He says it is also worrying that a national bottom line for dissolved inorganic nitrogen, or DIN, has been postponed for at least another 12 months. A teenager has been rescued after trying to cross Cook Strait in a dinghy. The 18-year-old called the harbour master this morning after his motorised dinghy broke down 12 kilometres west of Mana Island, north of Wellington. He started out last night from Kenepuru Sound. 2 men have been charged with murder over the death of Angela Joy Smith in a block of flats in Henderson earlier this month. The men, both aged in their 50s, will appear in Waitakere District Court tomorrow. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. And let's get down to business now with Nona Peltier. Hi, Nona. So this was some nasty statistics released today. The economy shed a record 37,500 jobs last month as the COVID-19 lockdowns shut down most businesses. I mean...
Yeah.
Is it going to get worse?
Yes, it is actually going to get worse, according to all the surveys that we're seeing. A variety of surveys are indicating that businesses are still really pressured, especially the ones, of course, in the tourism sector, but not just them. We've heard more recently about, 1,000 jobs here, 1,000 jobs there. It's a really quite widespread. So much of the industries that have been affected by tourism-related, losses. And also restaurants still are struggling. They're not 100% open. We had the restaurant brands today talking about their dining rooms are still not open. Sure, they're doing takeaway and delivery and so on, but their business is not returned to normal. They say that the New Zealand business is unlikely to fully recover this year. It's a difficult situation out there. And we had a survey earlier today which was the ASB Business Confidence Survey, and a net of somewhat 42% are expecting there to be redundancies in their business. That also mirrors another confidence survey we saw through the Auckland Chamber. So, it's almost certain that we're going to see more job losses.
Yeah, so that's more than 1,000 jobs a day in the 30 days of April. Do we know which regions have been worst hit?
Well, I would assume it'd be Auckland. I don't actually know which regions. We've heard it would be pretty widespread, and you would expect that to be more pronounced in those areas which rely heavily on tourism, like Queenstown and Rotorua. We know that those areas were hard hit, and we heard about that early on. So we probably have seen these job losses from those regions as well. Yeah. And, of course, the airline.
Absolutely. A lot of jobs from Air New Zealand. Okay, the Financial Markets Authority is warning advisors to take more care in giving clients advice. And I suppose this is around all the market volatility at the moment. What sparked the warning?
Well, there was an advisor not named who sent out a bulk email, if you can imagine this, to clients early on in March when the volatility took hold and we saw those massive drops. We were talking like 3% and 10% and all sorts of wild numbers. And at that point, this advisor sent a bulk email to clients saying, shift now to a conservative fund, a low-risk fund, and without ever kind of also suggesting that maybe these people ought to consider their own situation. What is their age? What are their ambitions?
Yep.
What are their goals? What have you?
How close to retirement are you?
All of that.
Yep.
And so, of course, some people actually took that advice, locked in those losses, and missed out on all the rebound, which we've seen since then. And the FMA is saying, in this case, they're just warning this particular advisor because he quickly clarified his position on complaints from investors to the FMA. And the FMA is saying in the future, sort of next year, there's going to be new rules for financial advisors. But this brings up a big issue, and we've seen this like last week. Someone was saying that they estimated that people had locked in losses of like $3.5 billion. That's an enormous amount. These are for people saving for their retirement or a home.
Yeah.
And, they're saying, look, these low-cost, no-frills Kiwi savers where you pay, the cheapest possible fee comes with no advice. He's saying these services should provide a very least a basic advice service for people so they don't make these mistakes. And it isn't, it isn't just one person who might have done this. This is quite widespread. We have very low financial literacy in New Zealand. Time and again, we write stories about it. I must have been, working on it for years about how we need to improve that. And yet we still have people who really don't understand how financial markets work. And here we've got Kiwi saver. We should be calling it Kiwi Investor so people understand it's an investment and to understand what that actually entails so they don't make these kinds of errors.
So the advice is get individual advice.
Debs, definitely get some advice.
Yeah, okay. So what else happened with the market today?
Well, just a perfect example. So yesterday we had the market up 1.2, today down 1.7, 193 points. That's on the NZX Top 50 Index to 10,857. You would expect to see that given the surveys we had out today, the job losses, and of course what's going on in China with Hong Kong and some of the upset there with conflict between the United States and China seeming to escalate during this period. So that's not helping things either. So we started out fairly strong this morning and then petered out through the afternoon. The New Zealand dollar, though, was little changed today. We are trading at 61.9 US cents and 93.6 Australian, which is a bit better than yesterday, and 50.5 British pence.
Thanks, Nona. That's Nona Peltier with Business. Another death has been added to the COVID-19 toll for New Zealand, despite the fact the woman, who was in her 90s, did not actually have the virus when she died. There are now just 8 active cases, all of them in Auckland. At a media conference in Wellington this afternoon, the Director General of Health, Dr. Ashley Bloomfield, announced there were no new cases of COVID-19 for the 6th day in a row. He said Eileen Hunter, a resident of St Margaret's Rest Home in Te Atatu, was diagnosed with COVID in mid-April and transferred to Waitakere Hospital and then North Shore before being discharged back to St Margaret's after 2 negative tests. She died on Sunday.
Now, it's important to note that Eileen was regarded as having recovered from COVID-19 at the time of her death, and COVID-19 is not recorded as the primary cause of her death on her death certificate. However, after consideration, we have decided to include Eileen's death in our overall tally of COVID-19 related deaths, consistent with our inclusive approach to date, so that we have got a good idea of the full impact of this condition on our health and wellbeing in New Zealand. This means our total number of COVID-19 related deaths is now 22.
Despite nearly a week of 0 new cases, New Zealanders are still facing another 4 weeks of Level 2 restrictions. Dr. Bloomfield said the World Health Organisation's advice is that countries must proceed carefully with relaxing restrictions because there's always the risk of a second wave of infections.
As we've said before, this virus has a long tail. And I think one could even say, look, the announcement of a further death today from an infection that happened some time ago shows just how long the impact of this disease can be there. And we have also seen that some people are testing positive quite a long way after they might have originally been infected. So there's that aspect of it, but there's also the important aspect, the pillar of our elimination strategy, and that is keeping it out at the border. We've been successful to date since going into alert level 3 and 2, actually since we started the lockdown, and we want to make sure that is all watertight, especially if we're contemplating opening up travel with Australia, which would be under a reciprocal no quarantine required basis.
Australia has recorded over 100 new cases of COVID-19 in the last 2 weeks. Dr. Bloomfield said before opening up the border with Australia, health authorities will want to be sure there is no community transmission and that any risks can be managed.
The key thing we'll be looking at in Australia is where are the cases and can they be explained? And those are the things that will be influencing decisions inside Australia about travel between states as well, I would imagine. So I think we will see once there is a degree of comfort with travel between states in Australia, then it may well be they feel they're ready, and I can't preempt the decision by the Australian leadership, they're ready for that Trans-Tasman arrangement.
Eliminating the virus from New Zealand is key, but eradication is out of our hands.
Really, eradication will be a global effort. It's very hard for New Zealand to say we're on a pathway to eradicate a virus that clearly is still incredibly prevalent and growing in prevalence offshore.
Vaccination is the world's best hope to completely wipe out COVID-19. Dr. Bloomfield was asked about whether the Health Ministry would advocate making vaccination against COVID-19 compulsory when one is finally available. He replied he doesn't envisage force would be necessary because most New Zealanders will want to do what they can to protect themselves, their families and the wider community.
I think we've crossed that bridge when we get to it, but I'd be very surprised if New Zealanders don't get right in behind an effort if the vaccine's made available and they can get one.
And Dr. Bloomfield urged New Zealanders to keep up the good work and stay safe going into the long weekend. Most New Zealanders are unemployed, they just don't know it yet. That from National's new leader as he headed home to the Bay of Plenty, promising his party had much bigger plans than the government for economic recovery. But the catchers will have to wait a few weeks for him to share the details. Todd Muller spent this morning in Katikati catching up with former colleagues, although as Bridget Burke reports, those colleagues didn't include Simon Bridges. Well, not yet anyway.
Some nice places outside there in front of bins if you want outside. Yeah.
Todd Muller on his first public walkabout since being elected leader and quite pleased with the turnout.
Well, I'm delighted that the media followed me. You're never quite sure who turns up with these things, but it's fair to say that Apata hasn't quite seen a circus like this for a while.
Back home in the Bay of Plenty today, the National leader toured a company he was also quite familiar with as its former CEO. Apata's kiwi fruit and avocado packing shed in Katikati, inspecting kiwi fruit ready for export, learning how to stack boxes and speaking to packhouse workers.
Some markets we have special boxes and labels.
Yeah, from Bay of Plenty to the world. How long have you been here?
6 years.
6 years.
Todd Muller stopping for a post-COVID style cuppa and chat in the tea room along the way.
You said you wanted some milk?
Just a touch, yes, thank you.
Do you want any sugar?
A week on from rolling Simon Bridges, the National leader said his party was united with a focus on the country's economic recovery.
Our GDP is expected to drop at such a level that we have not seen for 160 years. We have 1,000 people losing their jobs a day. Most New Zealanders are unemployed, but they don't know it yet. We have an extraordinary crisis in front of us, and our caucus is totally focused on developing an economic recovery plan that works for New Zealand families and gives people surety about their future.
So what is National's plan?
Well, we've already provided a framework through the COVID-19 that our priority was to open up the New Zealand economy as fast as possible. Foreign investment, direct investment, absolutely critical. We're clear that we don't see tax rises as part of the future, and skills and education, massively important for us. And of course, we've signalled that we will deliver the largest infrastructure spend in this country.
But don't expect any details for a few weeks.
You can't open up all the presents all in one day. We've got to stagger them. But New Zealanders, I have every confidence, will be very interested in what we have to say.
Todd Muller's return today, marking almost 10 years since his departure as the company's CEO.
I absolutely loved it. It brought back memories. My very first job as a 5-year-old was packing kiwi fruit in a little box. If they were too small, they went to the cows, and if they're slightly bigger, they went to the local market. The industry's moved on. The industry's moved on since then, and as you've seen here, the scale of the capital investment and the professionalism is very impressive. But they said they'd keep me on if I wanted to ever come back in my semi-retirement and keep contributing to the industry.
The National leader, who has been under fire this week for a lack of Māori representation on his front bench, wrapped up his visit, saying he'd had a couple of conversations with his former leader, Simon Bridges.
I'm delighted to see that he's signalled that he would like to return and help the New Zealand National Party win a historic victory in the next 3 months. And I've also signalled that if we are given the privilege of forming the government, he will be a key part of my cabinet.
With less than 4 months to go until election night on September 19, only time will tell if Simon Bridges will be welcomed back into the fold. For Checkpoint, Bridget Burke.
The government is pushing ahead with its landmark freshwater reforms that will introduce tough new rules to clean up the country's waterways. However, some concessions have been made since the draft proposal went out for consultation last year. There's also a $700 million sweetener to help the primary sector and other groups with the cost of new rules. Here's our political reporter Charlie Drever with the details.
With the majority of our urban and pastoral rivers being unswimmable at some point during the year, cleaning up our waterways will be no easy feat. But the government has announced how it plans to turn the tide. Environment Minister David Parker says the water reforms fulfil a number of Labour's election promises.
I think we all remember that at last election, the most salient environmental issue for a number of elections was actually fresh water. New Zealanders were worried that they were losing what they see as their birthright through the degradation of our waterways.
There are new limits on farm practices deemed higher risk, such as winter grazing and feedlots, and interim limits on agricultural intensification. A national cap on the use of synthetic fertiliser will also be imposed, to be reviewed in 3 years. With over 17,000 submissions to go through, there were bound to be opposing views. Fish and Game CEO Martin Taylor says while it's a significant step forward, there is still more work to be done.
We need to ensure the enforcement mechanisms are actually robust and that councils will do the job that they need to do. And the reality is many of them will need to be forced into a position of carrying out the government's agenda. And that's why we think a freshwater commission is probably the right way to go.
And Dairy NZ's Tim Mackle says while farmers' submissions have been listened to, some regions like Canterbury are going to struggle more than others with the new standards.
Some of those regions have just been through recent plan changes under ECAN's process, and they've been asked to cut nitrogen on dairy farms by up to 30% now. So to come in with new standards which still say you're not jumping high enough soon after that, I think is unfathomable.
A point of much debate was a national bottom line for dissolved inorganic nitrogen, or DIN. Fish and Game wanted it, many farmers did not. Climate Change Minister and Green co-leader James Shaw says the science is mixed, so it's been put on the back burner for another year.
If you've got something that's politically contentious and there's no scientific consensus, it's basically impossible to just pick a number. So we have said, look, we're going to give it another 12 months for the scientific community to try and come up with something.
National's environment spokesperson Scott Simpson says he's happy that the farming community's concerns on costs have been listened to, but he says there is still uncertainty about DIN and today's announcement lacks detail.
Farmers and councils and all New Zealanders want clarity and certainty. The announcement today leaves a lot of questions still unanswered.
But James Shaw didn't agree there wasn't enough detail.
Having read it, there is quite a lot of detail. Maybe they were reading the wrong document. Yeah, there is. It's a pretty weighty piece of work.
James Shaw says dozens of officials have been working on the document for 2.5 years, and it could have taken even longer. In the immediate fallout of COVID-19, NZ First MP Shane Jones says any new regulations should be delayed. But since speaking to the farming sector, he's changed his stance.
It was the peak bodies themselves who said we want a deal done before the election because there's no guarantee that we'll have a more receptive audience after the election. And if they hadn't have come and actually lobbied, I probably would have just sort of maintained my earlier stance.
And David Parker says delaying the reforms would have just meant extra costs in the long run. He says today's reforms will be used to immediately stop further degradation of waterways and getting them back to health within a generation. From Parliament, Ko Charlie Drever, DNA.
It is 8 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Get in touch about anything you've heard on the program this evening. We're interested in your views. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Fear is spreading in the small Queensland town of Blackwater after a local died of COVID-19. 30-year-old miner Nathan Turner is the youngest victim of the disease in Australia. How he got the virus remains a mystery. He'd been unwell for weeks and hadn't travelled outside the town since February. So far, those who've been tested in Blackwater have gotten the all clear, but others are being urged to do so. The ABC's Rachel Neely has more.
The people of Blackwater are waiting nervously as Queensland Health investigates how Nathan Turner contracted the virus. Angela Campbell runs a local real estate.
People just don't know how it has happened because especially a lot of people everyone's taken it quite serious, the whole thing, which even though we're a small community, everyone's been doing everything properly. So it's hard to say. I don't think anyone really knows, to be honest.
Nathan Turner worked as a miner, but poor health had kept him home since last November. He'd suffered respiratory symptoms in the past 3 weeks, but it appears he'd put it down to his other conditions and didn't seek advice. Queensland's Health Minister Stephen Miles says men sometimes don't go to the doctor when they should.
This message is particularly important for all the blokes out there. I know that men sometimes fob off their illnesses, they don't go and get medical assistance, but it's incredibly important right now that anyone with symptoms goes and gets tested. So I want anyone in Queensland who is unwell to go and get tested today, please, especially if they're from Blackwater or been in Blackwater.
This is the first known case of the virus in Blackwater. The man's partner has tested negative and is now in isolation. Queensland Health says a Rockhampton nurse who tested positive 2 weeks ago travelled to Blackwater in the first week of May but didn't have any contact with anyone there. The health department has sent a team of people to the town to trace the man's known contacts and has set up extra testing sites. Local man Chris O'Brien used to work at the mines. He says the news has sent a jolt through the small community.
I think there's a lot of confusion. A lot of people are worried. There's obviously we have an Indigenous community here, so obviously they'd be a little bit concerned. And there's, like any town, there's a section of the town that people have got underlying health issues, so they'd be also concerned.
The ABC's Rachel Neely with that report. To the US now, where the death toll from COVID-19 has now officially passed 100,000. That's greater than the number of Americans killed in the Korean War, the Vietnam War and the Iraq conflict combined. The BBC's Aleem Makbul filed this report from Washington.
Happy birthday to you.
Friends and relatives of more than 100,000 people in America can now just cling to the memories of happier times before the coronavirus.
My father was a really caring person, and he just wanted to help people. And he was really outgoing. He thought he was really funny.
Doug Lambrecht was one of the first confirmed deaths back on the 1st of March.
As somebody who lost someone so close to them and who was obviously very, very dear to you so early on, when you saw the way this was going in the country, how has it made you feel over the last couple of months?
It's scary. It's sad. I feel angry. We should have been listening to the doctors and the scientists. We should not have been listening to people talking about the stock market.
It's natural that people are reaching for answers, for someone to be accountable after scenes like mass graves being dug in New York.
If the Lord says so, I'll see you Saturday. Please.
We now know that African Americans, like Rhoda Hatch, are still dying in disproportionate numbers.
I think 100,000 is an extraordinary number. It means that there's a lot of pain and grief. But some of us in the Black community are very concerned that as the narrative became that African Americans were disproportionately impacted by the virus, that there was also then a push to open up the country that many of us think, prematurely, that again suggests the devaluation of Black life.
Those calls to reopen go on, even as the number of dead continues to mount and as the nation mourns. Well, flags have most recently been lowered here after tragedies like mass shootings, and even then it's been difficult to grapple with the scale of loss after sometimes dozens of people have been killed. But how then does America even begin to count the emotional cost of such a staggering number of deaths that have happened in fewer than 90 devastating days?
And that was the BBC's Aleem Makbul in Washington. It was a nail-biting decision with all the drama of Hollywood's biggest movies. The launch of the SpaceX rocket in the US has been years in the making, and if successful, will be the first commercial aircraft to send people into orbit, bound for the International Space Station. But this morning, Mother Nature had other plans. The BBC's Jane O'Brien reports from Cape Canaveral.
16 minutes and 54 seconds to launch. That's how close to the wire the decision was, and it all came down to the weather. It was that final weather briefing where they actually warned of electric fields, lightning and anvil clouds, and it was decided that the risk was just too great. The safety issues were insurmountable, and NASA, which is controlling this flight, SpaceX, which is controlling this flight, decided to scrub the entire mission. But the good news is that we will be back here on Saturday, because that is when the next window for launching is. The bad news is that we've got the same sort of weather on the way, thunderstorms in the afternoon, hot, slightly windy, heavy rain, and a 50% chance of likelihood that this will happen then.
And that was the BBC's Jane O'Brien. Just some feedback before we go to the 6 o'clock news. This person says the USA America's Cup team can't get an answer from the New Zealand government about being allowed in by late June and are on the brink of pulling out altogether. Why film people and not race teams? Todd Muller, most New Zealanders are unemployed. They just don't know it yet, is the dumbest thing I have ever heard from a National Party person, likely written by a PR who'd been out to lunch. It immediately made me go and contribute to the Labour Party. But hey, thanks, National. You're like watching an unreleased series of Veep. Pure black, well, blue comedy. And Brian's got in touch to say, will Todd be back in the pack house when Judith makes her move the day after the election? And Tony, regarding Air New Zealand, says, if you have several hours to spare, why don't they put some of their redundant staff on the phones? I think actually they have transferred some of their redundant staff onto the phones.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, I'm Susana Leatawa. Auckland is now the only region in the country to have any active cases of COVID-19, with no new infections reported anywhere for the 6th day in a row. However, the death toll is now 22, after a woman in her 90s who died on Sunday was added to the total. The Director General of Health, Dr. Ashley Bloomfield, says Eileen Hunter, who was part of the cluster of infections at St Margaret's Rest Home in Te Atatu, no longer had COVID at the time of her death.
The announcement of a further death today from an infection that happened some time ago shows just how long the impact of this disease can be there. And we have also seen that some people are testing positive quite a long way after they might have originally been infected.
Dr. Bloomfield says the case shows it's still too early to relax restrictions completely. The Prime Minister says September could be a realistic timeframe to see New Zealand's borders open up to Australia. The expert working group developing a blueprint for how a trans-Tasman bubble would work has said it could be operational by September. Jacinda Ardern says she is being cautious, talking about potential dates, but says September could be achievable.
Needless to say, Prime Minister Morrison and I are very, very keen to see us moving towards an opening up of our borders as soon as it's safe to do so. But we are just giving ourselves the space to make sure that we are ready to go, that we are safe, and that we're not going to export risk to one another.
Jacinda Ardern says officials are focused on doing the groundwork to ensure both countries are ready to go as soon as it's safe. Creative New Zealand says today's funding boost for the arts will help it keep supporting those in the industry who've been affected by COVID-19. The government today announced almost $100 million in funding for the struggling arts sector. Creative New Zealand has been offering emergency financial support to people working in the arts during the pandemic and has received $25 million to continue its work. Its chair, Michael Moynihan, says the money will make a real difference. An Air Force corporal involved in the rescue of 2 trampers says luck and good weather were reasons they were saved. Dion Reynolds and Jessica O'Connor were rescued yesterday amid emotional scenes from dense bush and difficult terrain in the remote Kahurangi National Park. Corporal Tom Hansen was the loadmaster and hoist operator who lifted the pair from the ground. He says it was a challenging task.
Just due to the nature of the terrain, on the left-hand side of the aircraft, we had about 25 feet below the main rotor of the aircraft to the trees. And then on the right-hand side, as the train dipped away, we had probably about 50 feet.
Corporal Hansen says the thickness of the tree canopy and the small area from where to lift the trampers added to the challenge. A consumer watchdog says some of Air New Zealand's customers, who are thousands of dollars out of pocket, need that money to live. Most customers whose flights were cancelled due to COVID-19 are not being refunded. Instead, vouchers are offered for future use. People surveyed by Consumer NZ paid an average of $2,200 each. Consumer NZ's Chief Executive John Duffy says some people are now out of a job and in financial strife, and credits don't pay the bills.
People are really disappointed in how Air New Zealand is acting here. They don't feel that their hard-earned money should be used to prop the company up.
John Duffy. An Auckland high school is investigating after one of its students posted an image of herself in blackface. Within the last 2 weeks, an image of a Westlake Girls High School student was posted on social media of her wearing blackface along with a racial slur. The controversial image angered and offended users, with many calling out the image for being ignorant and racist. The school is yet to take any action and will not comment further until after the investigation. The White House says Donald Trump will sign an executive order relating to social media companies overnight. Officials gave no further details, but the move follows a threat by the US president to regulate or close down social media platforms for what he sees as their bias against conservative voices. Yesterday, Twitter tagged 2 of his posts as potentially misleading. It's 6:04. Breakers captain Tom Abercrombie says they are willing to follow the Warriors and base themselves in Australia if it means playing basketball again. The National Rugby League competition resumes tonight after a 2-month hiatus due to coronavirus, with Parramatta playing Brisbane. The Warriors return to action on Saturday against the Dragons. The Australian National Basketball League is due to tip off in October, and Abercrombie, who has 3 children, says if restrictions are still in place, he's up for relocating.
We've spoken about, what if we had to go over and do what the Warriors have done? And I think the guys would be willing to do that if we had to. This is our jobs. We want to play at the end of the day, and we want to go out there and compete for a championship. And if that means that we had to do something like that, I'm sure the guys would be willing to do that.
Tom Abercrombie. England netball is hoping for some form of international competition with Southern Hemisphere teams later this year after their domestic league was abandoned. England's Netball Super League season has been terminated with immediate effect because of COVID-19. New Zealand's ANZ Premiership resumes on June 19th. That's the news.
Coming up on 9 to noon today, Avatar's crew got in. Other employers ask why their workers are still being locked out of the country. Hopes a more flexible justice system will emerge from the pandemic lockdown. Award-winning filmmaker Ramona Diaz on the battles for press freedom in the Philippines, bringing live performance to the front yards of isolated elderly Aucklanders. And to Radar and Gemma Gracewood had the last laugh of the week. Join me, Lynn Freeman, in for Catherine Ryan on 9 to noon on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waitomo, including Coromandel, mostly fine. Isolated showers about eastern Northland, Auckland and Coromandel today. Rain in Northland tomorrow morning, spreading elsewhere in the evening. Taranaki to Wellington, including Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Mainly fine today, cloud increasing tomorrow, with a few showers developing in Bay of Plenty, Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast and Wellington. Gisborne to Wairarapa, cloudy with isolated high showers about the coast, clearing tonight and fine spells increasing, the odd shower in Wairarapa tomorrow. For Bulla, Nelson and Marlborough, fine today, scattered rain spreading from the west tomorrow. Fiordland and Southland, cloudy with drizzle about Fiordland and Stewart Island, spreading to coastal Southland tomorrow. And for the remainder of the South Island, mostly fine with morning frosts or fog, persisting in some inland valleys, low cloud and patchy drizzle in Canterbury tomorrow. Chatham Islands cloudy with drizzle at times. RNZ National. It's coming up to 6:07.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just tuning in, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The country's struggling creative industry has received an almost $100 million boost from the government. Leaders in the arts sector say the funding will save jobs threatened by COVID-19 and create new ones, as well as keep some of the country's most iconic museums and galleries operating. Katie Scotcher has the details.
COVID-19 forced the closure of museums, galleries and theatres across the country and the postponement or cancellation of dozens of concerts, shows and festivals. The Prime Minister and Minister for Arts, Culture and Heritage, Jacinda Ardern, says the pandemic has decimated the creative industry, but it must survive.
Contribution of the arts to GDP is significant, whether it's film, whether it's music, it's large-scale events. New Zealanders and our visitors will often seek out events that are supported and created by our creative industries, and that has a flow-on for hospitality, accommodation and others. So it is an integral part of our economy.
Creative New Zealand has been offering artists and creatives emergency financial support during the pandemic. It has so far paid out more than $4.3 million in emergency grants to more than 1,100 applicants. It has also dished out almost $2 million to support projects by 68 New Zealand artists. Today's announcement sees Creative New Zealand's funding boosted by $25 million. Its chair, Michael Moynihan, says the money will make a real difference.
This is a great opportunity for us to amplify the work we're doing, provide some surety for the sector moving forward and really help us and them to plan for a future that includes a really healthy artist community.
The biggest wad of cash, almost $32 million, has been allocated to Ngā Tonga Sound and Vision. Its chief executive, Honiana Love, says the money will be used to digitalise its rapidly deteriorating audio and visual collection.
We're talking about iconic New Zealand collections, a large bulk, over 200,000 items of the TVNZ collection, including some of our really important early television, Wakahuia, Koha, the early Shortland Street.
Honiana Love expects the project will create a significant number of jobs.
I don't think that we've got to the final numbers of people that will be employed, but I would say that it will be around the 30 or 40 mark.
Jacinda Ardern made the announcement at Te Papa, which reopened today after COVID-19 forced the longest closure in its history. The National Museum's funding has been boosted by $18 million. Its chief executive, Courtney Johnston, details what exactly the money will be spent on.
Research, outreach, support to museums and galleries, libraries, archives, whare-taonga all around the country, education services. We're already pivoting our learning programs, working with the Ministry of Education, producing web content and TV content.
The funding announcement also includes just over $11 million for Heritage New Zealand, $4 million for the Waitangi National Trust Board, just over $2 million for the Royal New Zealand Ballet, and $1 million for the Antarctic Heritage Trust. A $2 million fund, which will be managed by Te Papa, has also been set up to support other museums, galleries and heritage organisations across the country. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Katie Scotcher aho.
Tenants in the commercial property market continue to wait for COVID-19 relief, while government coalition partners Labour and New Zealand First duke out a deal. New Zealand First leader Winston Peters says negotiations are still underway and an announcement will be made soon if ministers can reach an agreement. The proposal is that landlords and tenants would have to negotiate lower rents if tenants could prove their losses were related to COVID-19. But Mr Peters says he won't play a part in breaking the sanctity of contracts. He spoke to political reporter Joe Moyer about whether tenants will get any relief.
Is that going to happen? Are you still consulting with your coalition partner on that?
Yes.
When can we expect there to be a decision?
Well, very soon if we can get agreement.
What do you not have agreement on?
Well, who have you spoken to and what have they told you so far?
Well, I'm asking you. What do you not agree?
Yeah, I know, but I'm asking you.
Well, okay, so
who is your informant and why are you asking these questions?
So a cabinet paper was presented, right?
Yes.
And it's been, 6, 7 weeks?
Yes.
So what do you disagree with in that paper?
Well, we disagree from New Zealand First point of view about the importance of the sanctity of contract. And we think it is paramount in our sort of society, it's paramount to our business. That said, we do believe there's a way through this, and we have a paper ready to go for discussion on it, and we do hope to get agreement.
And what does that resolution look like?
Well, it looks like a fair reaction to a crisis of the type we've got without it being an overreaction. Let's face it, if the sanity of contract can be broken by a government, where do we go to from there? Now, if you've got a reason why you'd want to do that, or add provisions which should have been in the contracts in the first place, like the Auckland District Law Society, then that's time to act.
And what do you say to tenants who have been waiting nearly 2 months for this while politics has got in the way of it?
Well, they're wrong about politics getting in the way of it. We're out to ensure that the environment in which they hope to thrive is a sound business environment that's based on fundamental laws that are fair and responsible.
And that was New Zealand First Leader and Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters speaking to political reporter Joe Moyer. Just some of your feedback coming in on a variety of issues. This on Todd Muller going to the Bay of Plenty, to his old workplace actually, a packing factory for kiwi fruit. Warwick says, it is amusing listening to Muller putting the words recovery and National Party in the same sentence. Think Christchurch recovery, he says, followed by 3 exclamation marks. Sorry, Todd, it doesn't look good. On the subject of Air New Zealand, Stan says, I don't mind that Air New Zealand give me a credit rather than a refund. However, I am concerned that there is no way for me to know how much credit they are holding for me. Also, when I booked a flight last week, I wasn't given the option to use my credit to pay for it. That's interesting. Let us know if you're in a similar position. You can text us on 2101. And Margaret says, in my bank account yesterday was a refund of $7,000 from Singapore Airlines for my cancelled round-the-world business class flight tickets. I was booked to go to the UK and France for all of April. Guess which airline I will choose again in 3 years or so. Thanks for getting in touch, Margaret. And Rebecca says, can someone look at inter-islander refunds? This is the ferry. I cancelled fully flexible and refundable crossing worth $500, booked for April on the 21st of March, and no refund yet. Over 2 months later, despite repeated efforts. OK, Rebecca, we'll try and work out what's going on there. And anyone else having problems with ferry refunds, get in touch. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Engineers from Germany who left their families in the midst of a global pandemic to help fix Wellington's broken sewer system are being hailed as heroes. The specialists were needed after the pipes failed in January, forcing trucks to haul human waste from Moore Point to the dump, costing about $500,000 a week. Hamish Cardwell has the story.
The locals called them turd taxis, and thanks to the help of the Germans, they've carried their last fare. For 5 long months, the trucks have been making about 150 round trips a day, driving stinking sludge around Wellington's picturesque south coast. The fix? Fly in a team of 5 engineers from a specialist German firm. Max Vollenboich from Amex Sanovar left behind his wife and 2 young children, spending 2 weeks in quarantine before getting to work last month. He says New Zealand seemed like a pretty good place to ride out a pandemic.
The way we looked at it was more like we're not really safe anywhere since it's a global pandemic. I actually thought the risk with New Zealand and you guys having, I think great measures very early on. I didn't think this is more risky than staying at home.
His firm also manufactured the polyester liner, which has been pulled through 1.8 kilometres of the pipeline to repair it. It's a world record for length, and the first time this kind of thing has been done in Australasia. In short, it is incredibly technically difficult work at the best of times, let alone under the strict physical distancing rules of lockdown.
It was a very unique experience. We had to work very closely on a large site. It was a bit more difficult. I mean, for example, you have to do a heavy lift. You're supposed to lift with 2 guys. You can't really keep 2 meters of distance easily. But yeah, it went better and easier, obviously, with the levels going down.
On top of the complications from COVID, they also got flooded out and battled seepage problems from a huge sewer pipe above the tunnel, but still managed to get the job done ahead of schedule. Most of the work has been done by local contractors. Daniel Doyle from Brian Perry Civil, who is in charge of the overall project, says it has been a challenging time.
2 weeks into the job, yeah, I had a new baby come along as well, our firstborn. So that, as well as being probably the busiest I've ever been in my career, my personal life was pretty busy as well, in the middle of a lockdown. So yeah, it's been a pretty busy 10 weeks.
The Germans finished their part yesterday and are heading home on Saturday. But Mr. Follenboyich says he'll be back.
I actually liked it a lot here. I have to say, was a great journey. It was a great country, especially Wellington as a city. I like a lot. So we definitely made the plan. I promised my wife, when all of this is over, we want to make a trip and travel around and just come here for leisure purposes and then see the country a bit more.
Wellington Mayor Andy Foster says the city is incredibly grateful to the international team who came despite not knowing when they could get home because of international travel restrictions.
It's that sort of low-key, unsung heroism, and we're very grateful for what they've done, and we are also putting on a little wee function for them. Obviously, we are limited in how many people we can do that with, but just to say thank you, because it's something quite special at a really unprecedented time.
Mr. Foster also thanked the New Zealand team for their work and locals for putting up with the noise and smell of the work and the trucks transporting the waste. The second pipe is expected to be in operation in a week, with the whole project set to be wrapped up in early July. For Checkpoint, ko Hamish Cardwell-Aho.
It's 19 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The White House continues to tout America's success in battling COVID-19, but more than a dozen states are currently seeing a spike in new cases. Many of these states were the earliest to reopen. Wisconsin, for example, has reported its biggest daily jumps in new cases and deaths. CNN's Miguel Marquez visited the key swing state where some long-standing Donald Trump supporters are losing faith.
Forest County, Wisconsin, where the pandemic has left nearly a third of the workforce unemployed. Some here unsure how they'll make it through the summer.
I still owe for rent here. I owe for rent at my home. So I'm behind 2 months there. I'm behind 2 months here. I mean, thank God that I have lovely people who I lease from here and lease from there.
Lori Lockridge, owner of Luscious Lock Salon, says she still hasn't received her $1,200 stimulus check, and she's applied for a small business loan, but still hasn't received an answer.
We depend on every bit of money that we get coming in. And when we were shut down, we got nothing. And then we were promised things and never got it. So I just would like to see everything get back better and back to normal.
One small business owner feeling forgotten. The experience so frustrating, she's upset at the handling of the crisis and not sure she'll vote for Donald Trump again.
When I do a car, I take it completely apart.
Sean Schmidt restores muscle cars.
That will be going back up pretty soon.
He supports the president and thinks he's doing a fine job, but is still concerned the state may be reopening too quickly.
In fact, this past weekend, the town was just flooded with people that aren't from here. Southern Wisconsin, Illinois, Chicago,
And you think they could bring it here?
Oh, absolutely. Yep. And I think they probably will.
It was just about 2 weeks ago that Wisconsin's highest court invalidated the statewide stay-at-home order, creating a rush to reopen for some, hesitation for others. Yvonne Domke was just about to open her second business when the pandemic struck.
1 minute I was in business, and the next I had to shut my doors.
She laid off 2 employees and has since hired them back. She hopes to hire a third soon, but is concerned for their safety since everyone seems to be playing by different rules.
This past weekend I was a little concerned with Memorial Weekend and more
Why a little
traffic, concerned? That just people not being respectful of other people. We're all in the same storm, different boats.
For businesses opening up here, the biggest concern, avoiding a second wave of infections that could shut them down again.
Some people are just ready to go gangbusters, and a lot of them are taking it slow, but they're just very nervous of what the future's going to bring, because they keep saying a second wave of all this is going to come, and okay, what's that going to do to us?
And that was CNN's Miguel Marquez with that report. Live sport returns to TV screens throughout New Zealand and Australia tonight when Rugby League's NRL resumes across the ditch. Absent for 2 months due to the COVID-19 lockdown, the competition is one of the first professional sports leagues to return. Tonight's first game back features Brisbane and Parramatta, but much of the focus with the resumption has centred on the Warriors. The New Zealand club spent 2 weeks in quarantine in rural New South Wales just to be involved. Many players leaving behind young families with no certainty around when they might reunite. Former Warriors, Penrith and Canberra coach Matthew Elliott spoke with Felicity Reid about the appreciation in the Australian Rugby League community for the Warriors' actions.
I think the sacrifices that they've made, to come and ensure that they remain in the NRL and become a vital cog is highly respected in Australia, and they've actually become a lot of people's second favourite team over here. So I'm not surprised by it at all. And not only are they heightening their health risks, it's obviously when they're away from family, you can't help but be a little bit concerned during these times. So there's a lot of respect, and I certainly share that.
Do you think the Warriors will have been galvanised from this time together?
The players are spending 24/7 with each other, so that really gives the players and the individuals and the coaching staff to spend not just time on the game, but spend time on understanding each other and what makes each other tick, even at a higher level than normal. That opportunity does exist. I guess if you're looking for threat, you can say that it also gives the opportunity for people to get a little bit tired of each other's company and miss their family even more. But my experience with the players in the Warriors would be that will bring them closer together. They're very, very good people, and they're a tightly knit group. So this will give them the opportunity to come together even more than other teams.
How do you think this somewhat unexpected break will have impacted on the players mentally and physically?
Look, I think that there's positives in that for sure. There's that players that were suffering injury, and sometimes you just wonder whether the pre-season's too short because you don't get the time to prepare properly. So players will have had time to restore. Certainly, there's been a lot of distractions, hasn't there, during this period of great uncertainty. It's certainly nothing that I've ever experienced before. So, when you're talking about high performers, any distraction of any kind, if it impacts your performance, it's going to be, if it's 1%, that's massive at that level. So that'll be something really, really interesting to have a look at. Which teams have handled that best, and that will be an indication of the way that the coaching staff has directed focus of their players.
With the return of the competition and the revised draw, the teams you would have picked as premiership contenders at the original start of the competition, the sides you'd pick now?
I don't think that the draw is going to be the biggest variable. And people keep talking about the draw. I think the biggest variable is certainly the change of rules. There's no doubt about that. And going to one referee. So not only do referees have to get used to refereeing on their own, they're going to have to also incorporate some pretty interesting new rules that I like, and I'm certainly not opposed to the rules, and I'm really respectful of the way that the decisions are being made around that. However, I think that the teams that adapt best to that will certainly take the early opportunities. I guess some other teams have also had the great opportunity of getting some of their best players back who were injured at the start of the season or even injured in round two. So there are a few variables there, but I still think that the teams that I fancied early on, I haven't changed my mind on that just yet.
And that was Matthew Elliott speaking with Felicity Reid, and the Warriors' first game back is on Saturday night. An American playwright and one of the most important activists during the HIV/AIDS crisis during the 1980s and 90s has died. Larry Kramer found success with his play The Normal Heart, but he was better known for lobbying the US government to focus on the crisis and was instrumental in setting up the group Gay Men's Health Crisis. The BBC's Vincent Dowd reports.
Born in Connecticut in his 30s, Larry Kramer moved to swinging London to work for Columbia Pictures. He co-produced the Ken Russell version of Women in Love and was Oscar nominated for the screenplay.
So this is Hermione's country cottage.
Ah, I see the perpetual struggle has begun. Oh, we all struggle so, don't we?
Later, Kramer came to focus on a major struggle. In 1978, he published a novel called With Deliberate Provocation, Faggots, a critical satire of New York's gay scene. Some gay men disliked the book intently. But from the early 80s, Kramer, never frightened of confrontation, was one of the first writers to draw attention to the AIDS crisis around him. As a leading figure in the group Gay Men's Health Crisis, he attacked what he saw as official indifference, though some colleagues thought him wildly aggressive. He remained a writer, too.
I said, how am I going to get this message out to the world? And I knew nobody would make it as a movie, so that meant I had to write it as a play. The Normal Heart, I did write it as very intentionally as a cry for help and as a political act.
The Normal Heart made Larry Kramer the best-known AIDS polemicist, but he made enemies along the way. Forced out of Gay Men's Health Crisis, Kramer co-founded the more politically radical ACT UP. He wrote a furious book called Reports from the Holocaust. His many critics said Larry Kramer alienated anyone who, in his eyes, didn't appreciate the extent of the crisis. But he always said, as writer and activist, he did what he had to do to alert America to what was going on.
Vincent Dowd with that report, and a lot of you have been getting in contact about Air New Zealand and credits, problem with credits and problems with refunds. This person says, I have a credit but have to speak with them personally to claim it. I'm told they will answer my callback request within 4 days. But will the flight and current price still be available? Good questions. Another person says, I'm in the same position as the person who hasn't had a refund from Air New Zealand and can't use my credit for other flights I have since booked. There seems to be no way to track or use the credit. Again, this person says, had 2 uni kids' flights cancelled. I was informed I was in credit, but when booking one of them a flight last week, I wasn't offered an option to use the credit. We tried all day to get through on the phone, but after ages waiting, it would just switch off every time. Ended up just booking the flight without using the credit. Someone else says, I've been on the phone for 2 days to Air New Zealand. No one home, just a sweet soul pleading for me to be kind to each other and to our people. So a lot of you having problems there, and another person saying they still haven't got their money back from a trip for 5 people to Bali. No air credit as yet and no correspondence either. Thank you all for getting in touch. Morning Report will be with you first thing, and we are back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Prime Minister says a trans-Tasman bubble could happen by September. Creative New Zealand says the government's $25 million funding boost will help it keep supporting artists hit by the pandemic. An Air Force corporal who helped rescue 2 teenagers lost in a remote part of Kahurangi National Park says luck and good weather helped them survive. And Consumer NZ says some Air New Zealand customers out of pocket due to cancelled flights need their money back rather than vouchers. Those are the headlines.
Tonight on Nights, Raymond Sangapolotele takes time out from preparing for the Auckland Festival of Photography to be this week's cultural ambassador. Nicola Gaston is at the intersection of science, fact and fiction with Feminine, the metal behind Wonder Woman's bulletproof fashion accessories, and Alison Ballance layers up before venturing out onto Antarctica sea ice during our changing world.